So Mark Carney just told Doug Ford to basically get with the times, and honestly, the diplomatic shade of it all is chef's kiss. While Ford's out here throwing what can only be described as a very expensive tantrum about Chinese EVs, Carney's in Qatar casually dropping truth bombs about the future of Canadian manufacturing like he's reading tomorrow's history book today. And folks, the tea is piping hot because this isn't just about cars or tariffs or two political heavyweights having a disagreement. This is about whether Canada's auto industry is going to race into the future or stubbornly reverse park into irrelevance. Buckle up, because we're about to break down why this feud is way more important than it sounds, and why one of these guys might actually have a point that could save thousands of jobs. Spoiler alert, it's not the one yelling the loudest. Let's set the scene. Mark Carney, former Bank of Canada governor, former Bank of England governor, basically the guy you'd cast if you were making a movie about someone who knows money, is now running to be Canada's next Prime Minister. He's in Qatar, doing prime ministerial things, when reporters hit him with the Ford question. And Doug Ford, Ontario's Premier, and the guy who never met a highway he didn't want to expand, is absolutely livid about Ottawa's decision to ease up on tariffs for a limited number of Chinese electric vehicles. Ford's position is pretty straightforward. Chinese EVs bad, Ontario auto jobs good. Any nuance in between is basically treason against hard-working Canadians. But here's where Carney flips the script. Instead of getting defensive or firing back with the political equivalent of no, you, he goes full economics professor meets visionary CEO. He acknowledges Ford's concerns, sure, but then basically says look, we can either protect the auto industry that existed when flip phones were cool, or we can actually position ourselves to compete in the market that's coming. And that market? It's electric, it's innovative, and it's moving faster than a Tesla in ludicrous mode. Now before you think this is just Carney being a smug know-it-all, let's talk numbers and reality. The deal Ottawa's putting on the table isn't flinging the doors wide open to a tsunami of cheap Chinese cars flooding Canadian dealerships. We're talking about a small fraction of the consumer market. Think of it like this, if the Canadian auto market is a giant pizza, Carney's saying maybe we let a couple slices be these specific Chinese EVs. Ford's acting like Carney just gave away the entire pizzeria, the recipe, and his grandmother's secret sauce. The context here matters tremendously. China's EV industry isn't just competitive, it's light years ahead in some areas. They've been investing billions, subsidizing production, and cranking out electric vehicles with technology and price points that make North American manufacturers sweat through their suits during board meetings. Countries around the world are grappling with this exact question. Do we protect our domestic auto industry with tariffs and barriers, or do we engage with this new reality and try to learn, adapt, and compete? Carney's betting on adaptation. His argument is basically that if we keep Canadian consumers and manufacturers completely isolated from what's happening in the global EV market, we're not protecting jobs, we're just delaying the inevitable reckoning. It's like trying to save the typewriter industry by banning computers. Noble in theory, disastrous in practice. But let's give Ford his due for a second, because this isn't just about one guy being stubborn. Ontario's auto sector employs tens of thousands of people. These are real families, real mortgages, real communities built around manufacturing plants. When Ford hears reduced tariffs on Chinese EVs, he hears threats to Oshawa, Windsor, and Oakville. He's thinking about the workers who've already been through plant closures, restructurings, and the constant anxiety of whether their job will exist in 5 years. From that perspective, his anger isn't irrational. It's protective, even if the execution is more sledgehammer than scalpel. The problem is that protection without evolution is just prolonging the pain. The global auto industry is undergoing the biggest transformation since Henry Ford figured out the assembly line. Electric vehicles aren't a trend or a fad or something that might go away if we just ignore it hard enough. They're the future, and that future is arriving whether Doug Ford likes it or not. The question isn't if Canada adapts, it's whether we adapt smartly and strategically, or whether we wait until we have no choice and then scramble to catch up. This is where Carney's vision gets interesting. He's not saying abandon auto workers or let the industry collapse. He's saying the path to great jobs for Ontarians isn't in building the same cars the same way we did 20 years ago. It's in positioning Canada to be competitive in electric vehicle production, battery technology, charging infrastructure, and all the innovation that comes with this transition. And here's the kicker. Letting a controlled number of Chinese EVs in might actually help Canadian manufacturers figure out what they're up against, reverse engineer the competition, and innovate faster. Think of it like this. If you're training for a marathon, you don't get better by only racing against people slower than you. You need to see what the best runners are doing, study their technique, understand their strategy. Keeping Chinese EVs completely out of Canada is like training in a bubble and then showing up to the Olympics wondering why everyone else is so much faster. But there's another layer to this that's pure political theatre. Carney's running for Prime Minister. Ford's a powerful provincial premier who could make life very difficult for a future Carney government. This public disagreement isn't just about policy, it's about positioning. Carney needs to show he's not going to be pushed around by provincial premiers, even popular ones. Ford needs to show his base that he's fighting for Ontario jobs against out-of-touch elites who don't understand regular people. Both of them are playing to their audiences, and both of them know exactly what they're doing. The fascinating part is that they might both be right about different aspects of the same problem. Ford's right that we need to protect auto sector jobs and be cautious about cheap imports undercutting Canadian manufacturers. Carney's right that we can't freeze the industry in amber and expect to compete globally. The real solution is probably somewhere in the middle, which is the most boring answer possible but also probably the most accurate. What makes this whole situation even spicier is the timing. Carney's not even Prime Minister yet, he's just running, and is already in a very public beef with one of the most high-profile provincial leaders in the country. If this is the preview, imagine the main event. Ford's not exactly known for backing down, and Carney's got that particular brand of confidence that comes from running central banks and making decisions that affect millions of people. This is an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object, except both of them think they're the unstoppable force. The auto industry itself is watching this with a mixture of hope and dread. On one hand, any attention to the challenges facing Canadian manufacturing is good. On the other hand, political fights rarely produce nuanced policy solutions. What the industry actually needs is investment in retraining programs, subsidies for retooling plants to build EVs, support for battery production, and a coherent national strategy that doesn't change every time there's an election. What they're getting is two politicians arguing about Chinese cars while standing on opposite sides of a very complicated issue. And let's talk about the international dimension for a second, because Carney making these comments in Qatar isn't random. He's on the world stage, talking to international audiences, positioning himself as a global statesman who understands how interconnected economies work. Meanwhile, Ford's back home, focused intensely on Ontario, which is exactly what a premier should do. But it creates this optics problem where one guy looks forward-thinking and international, and the other looks protectionist and provincial. Neither characterization is entirely fair, but in politics, perception often matters more than reality. The Chinese EV question also ties into bigger conversations about trade, national security, and supply chains. There are legitimate concerns about becoming too dependent on Chinese technology, especially in critical sectors. There are questions about whether Chinese EV companies receive unfair subsidies that distort the market. There are worries about data privacy and the digital infrastructure built into modern vehicles. These aren't small issues, and they can't be dismissed just because someone wants to sound progressive and forward-thinking. So where does this leave us? With a future Prime Minister and a current Premier locked in a very public disagreement about the direction of Canada's auto industry, and honestly, maybe that's exactly the debate we need to be having. Because the decisions made right now will determine whether Canadian auto workers are building the vehicles of tomorrow or watching from the sidelines while other countries race ahead. Carney's betting that controlled exposure to Chinese EVs will make us stronger and more competitive. Ford's betting that protection and caution will save jobs in the short term. And somewhere in the middle is probably the actual answer that requires more nuance than a news conference soundbite can provide. What do you think? Is Carney right that we need to embrace the future even if it's uncomfortable, or is Ford right that we need to protect what we've built? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this conversation is just getting started, and trust me, this won't be the last time these two go head-to-head. If you want to stay on top of every twist and turn in Canadian politics as it happens, subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're breaking down these stories multiple times a day, keeping you informed, entertained, and maybe slightly less confused about what's actually happening in Ottawa and beyond. Hit that like button if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next one where we'll probably be covering whatever new drama erupts in the next few hours because honestly, Canadian politics never sleeps.